Chapter 3, Rainy Day Blues. Lem isn't one for conversation. His social skills are thoroughly limited to talking about old, dusty objects, with exceptions made mostly for older and dustier objects. Old and dusty things don't ask Lem to talk, or, even worse, talk about himself, or, even worse, to make small talk. He'd really rather face a horde of infected husks than talk to someone about the weather. It is significantly more socially acceptable to run away from the first. Running away from the second takes some doing. You'd practically have to hole yourself up in an abandoned, unchanging kingdom populated only by the walking dead in order to avoid small talk, which is a very specific example that definitely has nothing to do with Lem. The point, however, is that Lem agrees to allow Kroll to stay in Lem's blissfully people-free, small-talk-free shop with no small amount of reservation. He does agree, gods and more know why, something about having a heart or whatever, but he agrees, and then promptly braces himself for having to fend off small talk at every turn, so help him! This does not happen. Instead, Kroll spends long hours staring out the window, listening to the rain, or maybe waiting for his short wanderer friend to come back. He keeps Lem's back room cleaner than Lem ever managed himself, without being prompted or fanfare, and with an almost terrifying sensitivity to the way Lem likes his living spaces organized, which Lem can't complain about by technicality, and he has no way of explaining his growing awareness that there are now 2 people living in this shop, but that a visitor would never guess from the rooms themselves. All of Lem's personal items are in every nook and cranny, while all of Quirrell's things are still in a travel bag, tucked by the door, as if ready to leave at any moment. Quirrell goes outside sometimes to stare down the long hallways of the city building outside Lem's shop, but never strays too far, and always takes his nail with him, just standing there in the empty hallway with his hand on the nail's hilt. "I like sightseeing," Quirrell explains once, but Lem thinks that surely seeing the same hallways for the 10th time in 5 days can't be that interesting. By technicality, it's the least painful cohabitation Lem could ever expect. It's serviceable. Quirrell appears very good at making himself serviceable, and also nearly invisible, to the extent that Lem wonders if he imagined Quirrell turning over a king's idol in his hands with bright eyes and excitement. Then Lem walks into his own back room one day and finds the whole thing reorganized. By the time Quirrell finds him, Lem's been elbow deep in examining the archiving system for the last half an hour, and the first thing Quirrell has the gall to do is apologize. "I just got carried away with it," he says, looking almost chastised. "I meant to put away the shield you brought in yesterday, so it'll be easy to undo." "These relics are organized by social class," Lem interrupts, and before Quirrell can misinterpret, "You mad creature, that's genius!"
Quirrell lights up. "It is, isn't it? I didn't come up with the idea, I should mention, and I think I took the system for granted back in the day. But I always did think that putting class first and era secondarily was excellent for tracing how a social caste developed over time."
"You can practically see the birth of the knighted class," says Lem delightedly, tracing the shelf full of knights' crests and bits of broken nail. "Look at all this common-made steel, and then the same designs made in pale ore as the nobility co-opted the personal knight model. The filigree work on this one here isn't just a class marker, but a birth marker. 50 years in, the lower beings are virtually eliminated from knighthood." Quirrell nods, gesturing over to the next section of items. "And putting the progression side by side with the change in the artifacts of nobility, you can see the evolution from practical utility to a full caste of their own right, with unique ceremony and cultural rules. The shift was very dramatic, if memory serves."
"Looking at the records, you'd think it was overnight. Perhaps the mystique of the nobility couldn't tolerate needing any old bug with a weapon keeping them alive."
Or some well-meaning mercenary horribly embarrassed a member of the court. Either is likely.
By the gods, I can't even imagine the cultural constraints in the Pale Court. The records on good manners from the nobility sector of the City of Tears are obnoxiously strict as it is. What a waste, says Lem, to take a perfectly good model of contracted loyalty, ingenious the amount of personal safety and peace of mind that having a completely devoted, loyal knight could give you, to have a socially sanctioned reason for someone to stay at your side, without any reason to betray you, with a nail always at your service, and outrageously high-quality nails, too.
Lem scowled.
And then they chose to dress up their knights as arm candy. If it weren't for the mediocratic aspect of the knight class, I'd declare the whole thing more noble class hogwash.
Quirrell barks a short laugh.
The what aspect?
Knighthood is arguably the only class in Hollownest that wasn't locked by your birthright, is it not? One could get in by merit alone.
Quirrell chitters derisively, but says nothing.
The entire logic behind knighthood itself declares that if you can prove your worth, says Lem, frowning, then you'll have a place among the upper echelon of Hollownest.
And yet, it didn't happen, says Quirrell. Knighthood was restricted by birth and practice, if only because you had to be knighted by someone, and nobody with the ability to knight a bug would get the honor to a no-name commoner from Dirtmouth.
I'm sure there were exceptions.
Show me one person who was knighted on merit alone, says Quirrell. One.
Lem throws up his hands grumpily.
Well, I can't exactly, can I? They're all dead. You can't convince me that the societal rules were never broken. Rules are made to be broken. Look at you, after all. You're the one walking around with one of the finest make of nail possible without any idea of the caliber of nail you've got.
Something changes in Quirrell's posture.
Oh,
he says with an amused lilt in his voice.
I am?
Oh, gods and worm. Now, Lem's never once in his entire long existence been good with people. Some people could even make the claim that he devotes so much of his time and attention to relics in history because he understands those. Those people would be unspeakably rude and obnoxious. So Lem notices a difference in Quirrell, but for the life of him, he couldn't point out what the shift is or why it's happened. Okay, well, maybe if Lem just ignores it, the problem will go away. That's how problems work.
Yes, that nail you've got there is one of the best I've ever seen. Surely you noticed the engravings on the blade.
I've no idea what I've noticed or not noticed, says Quirrell. After all, I'm the one who apparently has no idea what caliber of nail I've got.
Lem gives Quirrell a strange look, trying to parse what Quirrell just said. Quirrell gives Lem a bland, amused smile, draws the blade with practiced ease, and lays it flat in his hands in offering.
Well, are you going to tell me about my own nail?
Ignore the problem, and the problem will go away. That's how problems work. Lem takes it by the hilt, feels the firm weight and perfect balance.
Well, this looks like a pure ore alloy from the Romantic era of blacksmithing. So called because each smith had few enough orders of high enough caliber to allow them a true love story with each weapon, every part crafted to perfection, filigree and etchings of impossible care and detail, blades sharp enough to cut a circle in the very air.
Says Quirrell with that amused, expectant look.
And then, of course, due to the outrageous care put into each nail, the nobility started giving them to each other as tokens of affection, to the extent that it ironically became an interclass scandal to give such a nail to a knight who could actually use the darn thing. If you believe the legends, of course.
Fascinating, says Quirrell. Tell me more.
Well, look here. The nail comes to sharp points at the hilt and crossguard, as well as the blade, which is a rather stylish but rare silhouette. Most of the other nails I've seen of this type have densely packed lines or abstract pictograms, but here, on yours, the engravings are so fine and thin that the metal looks clean and flat from a distance, which is a curious move I've not seen before. And here it looks like the blade is carved in what was either endless strings of nonsense letters, code, or entirely aesthetic tribute to the idea of language, which is another style I've never seen.
Says Quirrell. The amused look is gone.
I suppose you got a nail of this quality from a corpse somewhere,
says Lem. I got it from a person who is dead, says Quirrell. Yes. Lem huffs into his beard.
Bah, wasted on them, surely. Anyone actually worthy of wielding this blade wouldn't be foolish enough to die with it.
Quirrell says, suddenly fascinated with the patter of rain outside Lem's window.
And I don't suppose they were kind enough to leave a sturdy journal with the blade's name inscribed inside.
Quirrell's amused smile returns. Are the dead ever so clairvoyant? I'm sure many a future relic seeker will curse all our names for not writing down some small detail we both take for granted. Lem can't argue with that. It's folly to try and predict what future relic seekers will need, and even greater folly to try and write everything down. His notes are very thorough, of course, and anyone worth their salt shouldn't have any trouble with his shorthand.
Well, did you name it at least?
Quirrell shakes his head. It's not mine to name. Some relic seekers are haunted by their trade, Lem knows, performing all sorts of rituals to ask permission from the dead or to ward off ill air. Personally, he's never put much stock in the idea, but there's no harm in it. Whatever small things help those of weaker constitutions continue their work. In Quirrell, it doesn't strike Lem so much as a superstition or a fear, but a sense of respect, possibly even propriety. Lem stares more intensely at Quirrell's nail, notices the sheen, the keen edge, the clean hilt wrapping, a picture of diligent maintenance. Lem's seen nails much younger than this in much worse shape.
Considering your lifestyle and how little you know about this style of nail, this is very well maintained. In fact, I really must commend you for it.
Oh?
Yes, you've even been using the correct cleaner formula and everything, which is a very particular quirk that could have severely damaged the quality if you hadn't. In fact, using the right cleaner is such a particular detail that it would be impossible to come across accidentally unless you already knew the details of this nail.
Lem trails off abruptly, squints at the smug bug, who apparently said he knew nothing about high-end priceless antique nails, and yet had been coincidentally doing all the right care and cleaning of his nail just by chance. Yes, relic seeker, says Quirrell pleasantly.
Do you enjoy making a fool out of me?
Says Lem. I'm sure I have no idea what you mean, says Quirrell, in the same pleasant voice. Lem shoves Quirrell's nail back at him. Quirrell starts laughing and picks up his nail, slides it back into its hilt, and doesn't apologize or explain, not even a comment of how Quirrell came to know one of the most obscure facts about HollowNet's history. And just like that, Lem's reminded that Quirrell's bag is still firmly packed by the door, ready to leave at any moment, and nothing in this conversation has changed that at all. Lem's shell itches. The sound of the rain drums on the inside of his head. When Lem lived alone, it never mattered when he got this itch. He could do whatever he liked until it went away, strap into a difficult translation, reshuffle the inventory, count the geo, make tea, go fishing, a multitude of tasks picked up or dropped with only himself as the judge. He could spread half a dozen tablets across his entire apartment and pore over them for hours. He could close the door, listen to the rain, speak to no one for days, weeks, months on end, sink deep into himself until the rain in his head stopped and the itch under his shell faded, isolation and quiet icing out the wire nerves. And now Lem can't close the door or speak to nobody for months or disappear into some old tablet because Quirrell is in his house.
I need some fresh air,
says Lem suddenly. Oh, are you sure?
I'm sure,
Lem snaps. Quirrell goes silent.
I'm going for a walk, says Lem. I'll be back.
There's an umbrella by the door, sitting right by Quirrell's turnedly packed bag. Lem doesn't even touch it as he stalks out and kicks the door shut. Lem gets 3 steps into the rain and immediately regrets everything. It's really, truly, infuriatingly hard to pretend you're angry when you're standing in the rain feeling like a drowned bellfly. He's not angry and he knows it. Lem is just cranky and mean and standing outside his own home in the rain and feeling ashamed about going back in for, unfortunately, very good reasons. So he stomps off into the rain, into the heart of the city, walking fast to his usual haunt. This is why he moved to the middle of nowhere. Lem and other people don't get along. Lem doesn't get along with other people. A husk moans nearby, as if in agreement. Lem considers shoving it into the canal. A bug more narratively minded, a bard or scribe, who actually writes down all the stories Lem spends so much time reading, might think something poetic, Lem living in a city of corpses. They might pen verses about the perpetually weeping cavern ceiling, crying mourning tears over bodies so very dead, and yet not allowed to rest. What sort of person, they might write, chooses such a lonely place to live?
But I'm not lonely,
Lem announces the instant he reaches his destination, as if picking up a thread of conversation he'd never left.
I've never been lonely. To be lonely is to desire companionship. Desiring companionship would require knowing what companionship is in the first place. Therefore, I'm not lonely.
Lem looks up at the destination he's come to visit. The memorial of the Hollow Knight does not respond. The statue stands as it always does, tall and solemn. It's very fitting for a memorial, the central subject depicted in flattering preciseness, but surrounded by metaphorical abstractions. The vague masks of the knight's admirers gaze on in sober awe, highlighting the central figure, but never distracting from it. There's a distinct creative thumbprint to the work, one Lem has seen in other statues scattered through the city, but this is by far the sculptor's masterwork. This occasion, Lem takes time to note the rivulets in the cloak, guiding the eternal rushing water, letting the stone breathe with it. Long-lasting, clever, and mysterious. 3 of Lem's favorite things for a relic to be. As always, the plaque explains nothing. Memorial to the Hollow Knight, in the black vault far above, through its sacrifice, hollowness lasts eternal. He's long since memorized the text. If pressed, Lem could write it out from memory. At this point, he reads it only to idly twist and turn the shape of it in his mind, like a puzzle box he's long since resigned himself to never solving. Was the sacrifice simply death, an especially grisly fate too horrible to put on official record? Lem didn't think it particularly likely. As many airs as the kingdom puts on, a strong undercurrent of violence lust ran through many aspects of court life. A violent death would not be stricken from the record, yet also celebrated just for that. Perhaps the sacrifice was mystical, conducted in the soul sanctum as part of their so-secretive experiments. It's possible Lem hasn't been able to get his hands on any relics of their mysterious work. But the soul sanctum's reputation was not in good standing by the end. Many a personal diary idly mentions the rumors of screams. But then again, Lem isn't exactly the most organized of researchers when it comes to texts. He's better with relics and artifacts. Perhaps Quirrell could assist in... Lem stops, holds the thought at arm's length like it had attempted to jump up and eat his face. What nonsense was that? Quirrell was only biding his time in Lem's home until his mysterious friend returned and gave him permission to leave.
It figures, doesn't it?
Lem says with a harsh amusement.
Spend too long with a statue and you suddenly get ideas about wanting bugs to stick around.
The statue does not reply.
Lem didn't expect it to. Maybe one day he will and be sorely disappointed when it doesn't. Maybe one day he will and be pleasantly surprised when it does. He doubts it. If Lem had the capacity for any interesting kinds of madness, he would have surely developed it by now.
Well, says Lem in a huff, at least you aren't going anywhere. Whatever mysterious fate fell upon your subject, you will stand here unaffected.
The sound of rushing water fills Lem's silence, like a half-hearted replacement for a conversational partner.
It was the soul sanctum, wasn't it? Says Lem darkly. Some horrible experiment of theirs finally worked, but the makers were too tainted to be properly thanked. I bet your body is up in that tower even as I speak.
I don't think the soul sanctum was ever smart enough to accomplish anything. Above Lem's head appears an umbrella. Not any umbrella, specifically Lem's. He recognizes it because he picked it up off a husk, and their death grip had bent the handle. To no one's surprise, when Lem turns, there stands Coral, holding Lem's umbrella over Lem's head.
Can hardly work a proper experiment without a proper education, and you can hardly have a proper education without a proper teacher, says Coral, and the Soul Master was hardly a proper teacher.
What are you doing here?
Asks Lem, who has never had a functional filter on his mouth in all his days. The look Coral gives him is genuinely confused.
I think it should be fairly obvious, Coral says. The husks are very mobile today. It's not safe to be outside without protection. Besides, you'll catch your death standing in the rain so long.
Lem glances at the nail strapped to Coral's side. Armed with an umbrella and a nail. What a brave protector against the elements and mortality. The umbrella isn't big enough for two, and Coral's getting soaked.
What does it matter to you?
Coral shrugs.
Protection is why you hired me, isn't it?
Oh, Lem hates it when other people are right.
You shouldn't have worried. I've got all the protection I need right here,
says Lem sourly. Coral's confusion returns with a vengeance until Lem points at the memorial. And then he smiles a bit, like he thinks Lem is joking.
The statue?
A much more imposing figure than you, that's for certain. Sit down, you're making me nervous,
Lem says. So Coral does. And the umbrella still covers Lem's head, but not Coral's, and Lem doesn't quite know how to express why being dry bothers him so much. For a moment, they just sit there in the rain. Well, Coral sits in the rain, while Lem listens to the rain patter across the umbrella overhead.
Put that thing away, says Lem. You look ridiculous.
Weren't you the one complaining about the rain just the other day?
You'll have to be more specific. I'm always complaining about the rain. Put it away. I'm already soaked anyway.
So Coral puts it away, and Lem and Coral sits together at the base of the statue, with only the empty stone gaze of the Hollow Knight as shelter. It's the most company Lem's had in one place since he came to Hollow Nest. Lem harumphs at his own ridiculousness and taps the plaque with a foot.
The husks never come here. Not in all my time in the city have I seen one even get within 200 paces. That's why I come here. I haven't any capacity for defense myself, but this great stone knight makes a good watcher in times like these.
What a good knight, says Coral, protecting us, even when they're gone.
Lem gives him a side-eyed look.
They're a good neighbor, at any rate. The only problem is, from the looks of this plaque, it seems like something terrible happened to them.
Sacrifice doesn't imply a happy ending, no,
Coral agrees.
Indeed. I'd ask them what happened, but they don't seem the chatty sort, if you know what I mean.
No records of them?
Coral asks.
No rumors?
None. Not even a whisper of a footnote.
Do you know when the statue was built?
Coral says at length.
Only that it was near the end. Most records that mention the statue are journals written in the initial collapse. I've nothing to go on, you see. I can see this mystery knight's face, and I can know their name and title, but I can't know anything about who they are.
The staccato noise of the rain on shell and stone fills a few moments of silence. It's a very nice silence. Coral doesn't think too loudly, but he does think, and it's a rather pleasant sound. At length, Lem sighs.
Perhaps it's no business of mine, but it seems rather pointless for there to be a memorial in remembrance of a night that nobody remembers. Not a record, not a text, not a single story to survive.
Does there need to be one?
Coral asks. Lem gives him a look, but Lem couldn't say what his own expression is.
You'd think so. Can hardly appreciate what they've done if I know nothing about them, can I? and they seemed rather important, didn't they, to have a statue in the middle of the city?
Many things are important that are never remembered.
Humph, says Lem, because he's no fool, and he knows that such is the case.
But it doesn't have to be that way. If I could just find some text, some archive with a mention of them, unless there was a cover-up or some particular reason why they were erased, why this night put up in the city square and then removed so thoroughly? It seems deliberate.
Your imagination seems to be running away with you,
says Quirrell somewhat tetchily.
I've only my imagination. This plaque tells me barely anything.
It says everything it needs to,
says Quirrell in that same taut voice.
For any knight, the answer is obvious. They did their duty and fulfilled their role. For a knight to ask for anything more would be unfathomable.
Too much to ask for an obituary at the very least?
Their service is an obituary enough, says Quirrell. No, Relic Seeker, I'm afraid the answer was here all along.
What happens next is, in front of Lem's unfortunate eyes, something akin to a glass falling in slow motion. He can see it falling, knows exactly what will happen when it hits the ground, and he feels like he should be able to just snap out of it, reach out, grab the darn thing before it shatters into 1,000 messy pieces. Just behind Quirrell, the short wanderer emerges from the thick rain, coming towards them, their blank stare transfixed on the memorial of the Hollow Knight with an intensity that could give a bug nightmares. And just then, Quirrell says, in a clear, loud, wire-tight voice,
The Hollow Knight was erased because they fulfilled their use, and any good knight without a good use has no good reason to live.
The wanderer stops in their tracks. In the silence of the pouring rain, Quirrell follows Lem's stare over his shoulder, turns.
The wanderer doesn't move.
Oh,
says Quirrell. Rain streaks down the wanderer's pale mask into the empty eye sockets. Above them, the Hollow Knight stands immobile, forever glorified in its censored sacrifice, its own eyes blank and fixed on the three standing under its silent watch. It hits Lem only then how similar the wanderer and the statue look. The wanderer does not move. Quirrell does not move. The Hollow Knight between them certainly does not move. Now, Lem could not tell you what the heck is going on here, and frankly, he kind of doesn't want to know. See, things like this is a perfect example of why it's better to move to the middle of a city with half-dead citizens and make your new best friend a forgotten statue with no history. As the silence stretches from mortified to terrified to miserable, Lem figures, hey, it's not too late to pack up all his bags and find another half-dead city with a friendly apocalypse, is it? He can just run off into the wilderness and not have to deal with Quirrell not unpacking his bag, or Quirrell not bringing 2 umbrellas, or Quirrell actually being fun and interesting to talk to, or Quirrell looking like he wants to dig a hole and bury himself at the foot of the Hollow Knight statue. Because, as it turns out, the way to kill a bug isn't to put a nail in their face, or boil them in infection, or leave them to rot in a locked city, but to just let him put his foot in his mouth in front of his singular friends and leave him to stew. Lem looks at Quirrell. Quirrell has now wrapped all the way from mortified to horrified. The wanderer still hasn't moved.
Okay, something is going on, Lem snaps, and I do not want to know. But if you're going to lose your temper, little wanderer, you better do it now, because it's not happening back at my shop, and I haven't got all day. Lem!
The wanderer tilts their head. Their footsteps as they come forward are soft on the wet pavement. They hop up on Quirrell's other side.
Quirrell looks at the wanderer like they're a live snake.
But the wanderer only looks up at the Hollow Knight. 3 of them, tiny and real, and 1 legacy overhead, larger than life and looming. The wanderer pats the plaque wetly.
What?
Says Lem, because Quirrell still seems to be incapable of speech. The Wanderer points to themselves, then puts their hand on the middle word of the plaque.
Oh, we're doing charades now. Invite yourself to our conversation like you own it, and now we all have to play your party game?
The Wanderer looks at Lem with their big, blank eyes, puts their hand on the plaque over the word hollow.
What are you trying to say? Says Lem grumpily. You're hollow?
The Wanderer stills, shakes their head slowly. They try again. The Wanderer points to themselves, then covers up the middle word of the plaque entirely, so it reads, The Night.
You are the Night?
Asks Quirrell. The Wanderer nods.
Your name?
The Wanderer nods again.
By God and Worm, we didn't even get their name right this whole time,
Lem grumbles. He studies the plaque again. The Night, as if the night were named after the absence at the center of someone else's grave. Lem frowns.
Are you sure you don't want an adjective with that?
Lem asks. The Night shakes their head.
Are you very sure? As it stands, it sounds a bit like you're saying there's only one knight in the whole world and it's you. Rather boastful of you, actually. Most knights have some sort of qualifier by their name.
The Night shakes their head again.
So you insist on inconveniencing us all, says Lem without tone. Are you the one who has to keep track of 7 different historical knights at minimum? No, it's me. I have to do that. And the only way I can do that is because they're all called the this or that knight, or the so-and-so knight, with a proper adjective in front of their title. And here you are claiming to be just the knight and making life more difficult for everyone. The nuisance knight is what you are.
Please do not call them the nuisance knight,
says Quirrell. Fine, the rude knight.
They don't even talk. They're hardly rude enough to be named for it.
The annoying knight, says Lem.
No.
Well, what would you suggest?
They have the right to name themselves,
Quirrell insists. Pauses.
Besides, the best adjective would obviously be the wandering knight.
The Night stares at him.
If there had to be one, which there doesn't,
Quirrell says hastily. The Night looks back up at the Hollow Knight. Slowly, the silence returns.
So are you going to lose your temper or what, troublesome knight? Says Lem.
Lem!
Because the sound of Quirrell's mortification right now, relic seeker, could be heard from Mantis Village.
The Night shakes their head.
Great, says Lem. I'm glad we've got that squared away. Did you hear that, Quirrell?
I don't think it works that way,
says Quirrell.
If they say it does, then it does, says Lem. It's only you who won't let yourself off the hook.
But...
No, stop. Stop having problems for 2 seconds.
Quirrell gives Lem a flat look.
I didn't say forever. I said 2 seconds.
Quirrell, at length, gives Lem only a disparaging look.
I did not mean what I said,
says Quirrell to the Night after a moment, who only looks at Quirrell without expression.
About the Hollow Knight. It wasn't what you think.
Carefully, Quirrell's hand moves over to the handle of his nail. Not a threat, only an unconscious movement. The Night considers him. At length, nods. The silence resumes.
Great. Now we have one umbrella for 3 people, says Lem, and we're all soaking wet sitting in the rain. 3 idiots in a row. Couldn't have had a conversation somewhere drier, could we? We had to have a nice, peaceful, friendly moment of relaxing out in the pouring, freezing rain.
Is 2 seconds over yet?
Says Quirrell.
No.
Quietly, the Night sneezes.
Achoo!
Quirrell laughs almost instantly, like the sound made a daring escape before his brain could say anything about it.
Oh, all right, says Lem. I'm calling it a day. We're going back inside. I hope you came here with something good to sell, because my shop isn't a rest stop.
The Knight rummages around in their cloak and then pulls out a wrought iron piece. Not the same one they bought the last time they'd come to the shop, but a different one, obviously of the same make and model of the original.
Oh, good gods, says Lem. You actually found more pieces. You couldn't have led with that, could you?
The knight shakes their head.
You're a menace. Fine! Get up. I'll buy your strange iron garbage. Go on, then.
The knight hops off the stone ledge and waits for Quirrell to follow. Lem snatches up the umbrella Quirrell left behind. The awful rain falls steadily over the three of them. But even as he turns to go, Lem hesitates and takes one last look back at the Hollow Knight statue, as if to say goodbye. In the corner of his eye, he catches the knight doing the same.